Hi, everyone. Great to see all of you. Welcome to the third Ulrich virtual program that accompanies the Ulrich Artists and You Community Billboard Project. I hope that all of you have had a chance to see the billboards, and if you haven't, you can find them in a slideshow on our website under current exhibitions, and then click on the Billboard project page. So if any of you who are participating this evening haven't had a chance to see Ann's billboard, just go ahead, ulrich.wichita.edu, and take a look while I'm going on and on here. You'll also find a map with locations on that page, a link to the portal where all the artworks featured so far are identified and described, information on the Smartify app, and Jed Bodwin's curated playlists on Spotify. And these are intended to enhance your billboard viewing experience. I'm Leslie Brothers, director of the Ulrich Museum of Art, and I'm here with Jana Irwin, our head of education, Ksenya Gurshtein, our curator of modern and contemporary art, and Ranjit Arab, our creative communications manager. And we're going to take you this evening into the studio of Wichita artist Ann Resnick. And her billboard with the work Spring from 2015 can be seen at 2518 East Douglas. The Billboard project has been generously supported by lead sponsors Mike and Dee Michaelis and Emprise Bank. We have additional individual support from Lee and Ron Starkle, Dr. John and Nancy Brammer, Karen and John Hagman, Jeff and Janice Van Sickle, Tammy Bradley and Nancy McMaster, Rick Muma, George and Eleanor Lucas, Dr. Pat Purvis, and Laura and Craig Thompson. If you guys are out there, thank you so much. And we are still raising funds for this project, so if you're interested in being a sponsor, just let us know. So we have also received 2 generous grants to support this project, one from the Kansas Creative Arts Industries Commission, which awarded us funding from the National Endowment for the Arts, and the other from Humanities Kansas. And we are grateful to have their funding. We love working with them, and we're really proud to be associated with these organizations. So I just want to thank Jana, Ksenya, and Ranjit for working so hard to put this together. Thank you, Ann, blowing you a kiss. And I'm going to pass the screen now to our wonderful curator, Ksenya Gurshtein.
Hi, everyone. It's really nice to see you. I can see in the list of participants that we have lots and lots of folks whom I know and some whom I don't, and welcome to everybody. Thank you for being here tonight. I'm going to quickly introduce Ann, especially for folks who maybe aren't part of the Wichita art scene and don't already know her well. And then she and I are going to talk for about 40 minutes, and we'll leave some time for Q&A at the end. And if you want to ask a question, you can use the chat function or the Q&A function, ideally the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So Ann Resnick was born in Syracuse, New York, and was educated in visual art in Alaska, in Utica, New York, and at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. She was educated as a printmaker, but by now is an impressively multimedia artist who over the course of her career has worked with a really broad range of materials, and that's something we'll talk about tonight, I think. She has exhibited her work throughout Kansas and Missouri, as well as in New York, North Carolina, Louisiana, and Japan. Ann and her late husband, Kevin Mullins, had lived in upstate New York, North Carolina, and New Mexico before coming to Wichita in 1995. And after moving here, they both became or continued to be very active, not just as artists, but also as advocates and promoters of the arts in Wichita. And many of us know Ann in that capacity, as well as in her capacity as an artist. Notably, they founded the Project Gallery in the very studio space where Ann is hosting us tonight. Project Gallery was an important conduit for bringing work of contemporary artists from around the country to Wichita between 1997 and 2007, and sporadically thereafter. And Ann sometimes still hosts exhibitions in her bedroom, which is always a delight. Since my arrival in Wichita last year, I feel very fortunate to have gotten to know Ann both as an artist and a friend. And I want to really thank her for hosting us in her space tonight and for taking part in this conversation. So, hi, Ann. Can you hear me okay?
Hi.
Okay. So let's start. Leslie mentioned Spring, the piece that's on actually the fragment of which is on the billboard on Douglas. So I'm hoping that maybe Jana can bring up that image of the work Spring and of the billboard. And so maybe we can start by talking about that piece. There it is, coming up. Right, so there it is in its full glory. And then Jenny, if you go to the next slide, you'll see the billboard, which shows just a fragment of it because the work is so detailed and so nuanced. We didn't want to cram it onto the billboard, so we're showing just one piece of it. And so I just wanted to start out in by asking you to talk about sort of where that piece fits in your larger body of work, what the story of its creation was, and some of the larger context surrounding it.
Sure, its origin story. I think you have to go back to 2006 really to see how this work kind of began. I was waiting for a motorcycle to pass, but
I think, Ann, I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you. Can you speak up slightly?
Yeah, how's that?
That's good.
Okay. So, all right. So I would say that Spring is a natural evolution of work that I began in 2006. Those were large drawings, with chalk, spray paint, and and stencils. And the burning then was very rudimentary. I didn't have good tools then. But so I thought that work in 2006, for me, it was too specific. It dealt very directly with individuals. They were memorials of sorts, and I wanted something a little more universal. I wanted to take a couple of steps back. So a lot of work got made between 2006 and, say, 2012. But when I started to make work that I think is more relevant, that would be Remember Me and Our Town.
And Jana, if you want to, we have some of these images that Ann is talking about that I think might be helpful for people to see. And also, I think, Ann, this is so self-evident to you that you didn't point it out. But so Spring is, and I didn't point it out yet, but so Spring is made out of burned paper, right? So those white, so this is the companion piece to Spring that we're seeing on the screen right now. And so the gaps that people are seeing are holes, right, that you burn into the paper.
So if I actually, so let me just grab this. Here's can you see that? So this is from Remember Me, which was 220 plus pieces like this, which really started me down this path. And this is how I worked Spring as well. Only starts with something from the newspaper. It was a paid memorial, kind of a display ad size in the Sunday paper, Sunday Eagle. And I used the same stencils from 2006, only just bits and pieces of it, or I shifted the stencils, manipulated them in various ways. One of the things I do like about these pieces is that I tried to spray judiciously and leave any expression of love or affection visible. It's not always possible, but anyway. So this led to Our Town, which is similar work, and it came from the obituary pages of the newspaper, the Wichita Eagle. And, but in that work, I kind of obliterated any detail. And remember me, I tried not to leave any trace of individuals, names or anything like that would give away somebody's private.
What about your use of color? And people can see the work behind you. Some of your work is just so remarkably, vibrantly, beautifully, and complexly colored. So I'm wondering how you think about that.
Well, it's two different things. Prior to the work, and in spring, spring and this are the same, basically, in terms of color, even though spring is so sparsely colored. But in that work, it's pretty early on limited myself to a limited palette of fluorescent paint. And that is because fluorescent color to me is otherworldly. And it is, in fact, it's not like conventional color. It is actually energy. And so it absorbs UV rays and then emits light. When it's exposed to light, it emits a glow. And to me, that kind of speaks of another life force in a way. So in some ways, I think of these as harboring ghosts. So spring grew out of these other works, and just titled. I started titling things with the month or the season when people close to me had died. And that's the genesis for it.
Right. I think that season is so interesting, and it leads to another question I wanted to ask. So, I think when I first looked at spring, and I know you to be a nature lover, I kind of thought that it alluded to natural light and natural foliage, right? And actually, the way the billboard is installed on Douglas, there are some trees behind it, and it looks. The last time I drove by it looks just so beautiful. You can see the light coming through the trees, and then you can see the billboard, and they kind of echo each other. But for you, there are these references to things like plastic funerary flowers, right? And obituaries, and like very specific references to things that I think are sadder than maybe people would immediately grasp. And I'm wondering if you think about that discrepancy and what you think about, what your audiences bring to the work versus what you bring to the work.
Well, I think that it's, what would you say, two sides to the coin, that nature is beautiful, and but it can be equally terrifying and cruel. Or I think, like my father used to say, every silver lining has a cloud. I think
it sounds like you come from a really cheery bunch.
I think, I think that's at the root of it all, I'm not qualified to speak of the psychology, but I think that it looks cheerful, but partly it's the source material that gives it its resonance, I hope, at least some of the time. And that's what I count on in context. So partly you have to see the work surrounded by the rest of the work.
Mm-hmm.
Hardly ever made to be a single entity. It's all a larger body.
And there is, one piece you mentioned, Our Town, Jen, I think we have a slide of it. There is, I think, that work is maybe a good example of that, where the installation is just, I think it kind of overwhelms you by the sheer volume of it, right? And if you know that the very original source material, the paper that you painted and burned through were obituaries cut, from over 2 years. I think keep going, Jenna, if you keep going. Keep going. There it is. So I think, that piece to me is particularly remarkable in that way that it kind of, overwhelms you with volume. And the next slide shows details of the work. So you can see kind of how remarkable each individual piece is. And actually, we do have a video, because I think it's one thing to kind of tell people that it's burnt paper, but I think it's really, really cool to see it in action. So we do have I think, is it next slide, Jenna? There we go. So, Ann, I'm going to ask Jenna to play the video for people who are watching at home that shows your working process. I guess while we're hoping for the video to maybe load and come up, will you talk, Ann, about time and like your experience of time as you create these works? Because I think hopefully something that I was hoping the video would show, but there is just, remarkable and mind-boggling to me, the kind of dedication to physical labor and commitment of time that your work takes.
I know. I think I often think of myself as an endurance artist, artist in a way, even though it's all private, it doesn't take place with an audience. There is an element of just inhuman exertion. So time is a huge part of my work now, but it stems from just an awakening, a sudden realization that there's, just not much time left in any case. And so in that way, I feel like I need to not waste time and account for time.
Right, and one of the ways you've been doing that is by actually titling the works by the amount of time that it takes to produce them. Janet, do you think we'll be able to get the video, or do you think we should give up and move on?
seems to be having a little bit of difficulty loading. We might want to move on. Maybe we can come back to it.
Okay, if you go, so maybe we can show the next slide, which shows the next couple of slides show some of these works that are titled. And I also I want people to see the titles. What's the largest amount of time you've ever spent on a piece?
Oh, well, the one I remember offhand is 115 hours, but that didn't include the drawing, which I forgot to add in.
Okay. Actually, so that's the piece people are seeing right now. It's titled 115:17.13. So it's 115 hours, 17 minutes, and 13 seconds. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess that's right. Yeah.
Since we've been in the pandemic, has your relationship to time in the work you've been doing in the last few months changed at all?
Yeah, I think like everybody's relationship to time. I feel like it's time out of time. I think I have stopped counting anything, or counting for my time, because it just seems like a lost year in many ways, and it's harder. It's harder to focus. And I think time is not the same. Although I will say that in recent weeks, when you see people adapting to the new reality, time did speed up again. I think it was very slow in March and April, and even May. And then as we went along, I think now it's going too fast again. So we're in trouble.
Will you show us some of the work you've been doing in the last few months? Because I know you stopped burning paper for a while, right? Both kind of for...
Stopped burning primarily because I thought that anything that produced smoke could have an impact on my lungs, and it just seemed like asking for trouble. So, yeah. I can show you. Oh, well, there's right here.
Oh, okay. All right.
I think there are slides too.
Yeah. So, will you talk about these works?
Sure. They're very different, and yet to me they're kind of the same. They're watercolors, for one thing, which is not a medium I have used much, not at all, 20 years, but it's airbrush also, which I've never used. So I'm not adept with it, and I think that actually is very liberating. I have no expectations. It's as if I were Danish. I don't know if you know that story about Danes being.
Wait, say it's as if you were Danish?
Yeah, you know, the Danes are the happiest people on the planet. Have you never heard of it? And that's because they don't have high expectations.
I see.
That's how this feels to me. That I have no expectations of what it will be, how it will work out, if it will work out. It is what it is. So, but I do think that these relate to my other work, because if you look at it, it's the same network, same kind of familiar pattern. But it's like almost a cartoon of that pattern in a way, and so.
And we do, Jenna, at the very end of the PowerPoint, we do have a few slides of these sort of closer up if you want to show them, because they do have this amazing, as so much of your work does, in each kind of in its own way, there's this amazing, if you keep going, Jenna, at the very end of the PowerPoint, there are some images of the watercolor airbrush work. But they have this amazing textural quality where I feel like you can't you like physically can't focus your eye on them.
Oh, yeah, I know, it's like they're in the pandemic.
It's like that, right? Jenna, do you think this video will work of Anne doing the airbrush? So yeah, so these are some of the still photographs of the work that's behind Anne, so we can see them in just a little bit. Sort of higher quality images. You want to try the video, Jenna?
Some people will recognize this studio space as they probably learned to tap dance here.
Because it used to be a dance school.
Dance school.
That's right. In your storage space, you have some pretty great 70s murals, right, of people dancing. I guess while we're moving, so I'll mention that these drawings are different in yet another way. So I feel like we've been in your space for like half an hour, and you've shown us things that are, burned paper, layered paper, spray paint, airbrush, watercolor, and these drawings are yet another set of media. So I was wondering if you could talk both about these drawings, but also how do you think about media more broadly?
I'll answer the last part of that first. I have no restrictions when it comes to media. It's, I'll use whatever occurs to me to use. And, I have preferences, I guess, always, but yeah. No restrictions.
Are there some media that you think are more fitting for expressing certain ideas?
Well, yes, that's it exactly. I think that I will use whatever I think best conveys the idea, but sometimes it's just a wild hair, like to use the airbrush. It's just like, well, just try that. Just haven't done it ever.
Is there emotional valence attached to different media? Like certain media have, the way some people associate color with emotion?
I would say with the burning for sure, because that to me is like a great the process informs the intent, I think. It's like most of the burned paper pieces are memorials of one sort or another, and so producing ash seems like a interesting byproduct of all that. But it's I think it conjures up ashes to ashes, or things like that. It's also I think ritualistic, and it's in the process. So that suits me also. It suits the content that I think is there. So,
Will you talk about where this interest in memorialization comes from? Because we started out talking about it and kind of the presence of memory, death in your work.
Well, the short answer is people started dying. So, which I don't know, it didn't come as a surprise to me, but I think our town is a good example of how I think about something like that. Where in the city of Wichita, we had just a rash of deaths of people that were really important in the art community. It was surprising and numbing in a lot of ways, but so it was in that. Well, maybe started in 2011, but our town spans 2012. Took me till 2014 to finish it. And I guess it's actually 40 pieces, so it's 40 weeks of the Sunday Eagle obituaries. And so it covers quite a few of the people that we know as a community. And I think, the title is Our Town. It comes from.
Jenna, do you mind pulling it up again just so people can see while Ann is talking what she's talking about?
So it's, makes reference to the Thornton Wilder play, Our Town, which I feel like everybody performed in 7th grade, performed or read.
It did always strike me as a very odd play for middle schoolers to perform. Like, here are people who have really no notion of kind of life and death. It's such a profoundly sad play.
Right. But no sad. So that's why.
That's true.
I mean, that's my supposition. In any case, it struck a chord with those obituary pages. And I feel like I encapsulated the community in that piece.
Mm-hmm.
What? I mean, I know I'm guilty of personification. Did I say that already? It's like, doing these things with great pathos, or I don't know. Everything has its own weight. But to me, that's what's that's what's in it.
And I think those slides, they're slightly earlier on. If you just keep going back. That's Our Town. So yeah, I just wanted people to, again, kind of get a sense of the scope. So what you're seeing in this installation shot is about, I think, half of the work, right? So when it was installed at Steckline, it covered one full long wall and then kind of went around the corner. Yeah. And
So I guess.
I'm sorry, say that again.
So it's like a timeline when you see it in the installation.
So maybe I'm just, I'm an art historian, so I'm professionally obligated to try and like slot artists into movements. It's part of, you know, kind of our oath that you take as an art historian. You have to pigeonhole people. But I'm wondering, like looking at this, and especially your other project, which is also, you know, so you're an avid newspaper reader, right? And so I love the way that the newspaper shows up in your work, even though your work is also so visually abstract. Jenna, if you go a few slides forward, there is a work called the Pessimist Index. And I was wondering if you could talk about it, and sort of, I'm curious if you think of yourself as a conceptual artist, as somebody who kind of like turns the ideas and feelings into data, right? Who kind of, at least that's how I think of some of your work. It's like this amazing way of quantifying the unquantifiable, which is our daily experience. But I don't know if that rings true to you.
Well, I would say that I am a conceptual artist in as much as I will use whatever resources are available to me to advance an idea. But at the same time, I'm really object-oriented, process-oriented. So I like to think of myself, I think I just made this up, but I'm something akin to a speculative artist, where I create the universe, the works exist in, right? And I make the rules. And for me, the universe is the exhibition. I feel like that's, you know, that I see these things as they're meant to be exhibited. Works can exist independently, but it's always better to see it in context. And I also, when I think of other artists, you know, who they don't work like I do necessarily, but the things that I prize are idiosyncratic approaches to making work. It's an attribute that I admire. And people like,
Thanks, Jana. Jana was able to pull up the Pessimist Index, and so I'm wondering, can you just quickly explain what it was? Because again, I think it's so kind of, it's both, I don't know, funny, sad at the same time. I love the idea behind this work.
Yeah, it was actually, that is community-based work. That I invited people to wherever they were, all over the country, and Mexico, the farthest away, to look at their Sunday paper and decide how each article on the front page, how pessimistic it made them feel or optimistic, and then had assigned color, you know, to grades of pessimism. And if something were optimistic, you could use yellow.
Okay.
So that's basically. Yeah, it's a project I like very much too.
Have you worked a lot communally with sort of other people, which I think is also a really interesting kind of.
I would say it's an adjunct to my practice. I don't do it as often as I used to. A long time ago, I belonged to a collective of engineers and artists. You know, and that's maybe why I don't do it anymore, because it's complicated. But I think running the gallery was kind of like that.
Yeah. So, yeah, I guess, I mean, I love about this project that it kind of like, in aggregate, what you were saying, that there's a power to the works being together, and it kind of like takes the collective temperature in this very endearingly literal way with the color.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The last election. So.
I'm sorry?
It was prior to the 2016 election.
I see. You're suggesting that maybe the color palette would be more monotone?
Who knows what it would look like now?
That's true. Well, so speaking of taking collective temperature, I'm looking at the time. It's 6:45, and I see that we have one question in the Q&A. So maybe I'll shift to that portion and give somebody other than myself a chance to talk and to ask questions. So Donald Rogus, hi Donald, is asking, in your burning pieces, how are you guided in what you leave and what you remove? Is the negative space guiding you?
It's different. In what I'm doing currently, I'm following my own drawing. So I already know pretty much what
if you could just speak up a little bit.
I think in my current work, when I burn something, I'm following my own drawing. Drawing takes almost as long as the burning. Well, actually, I think it probably takes longer. In other pieces, when I've used the newspaper and burned, then I'm trying to leave. Sometimes I'm trying to leave very kinds of specific things. Like I said in Remember Me, I liked leaving the expressions of affection. But that's, I don't often have text in anything else now. So I make a plan. I make a drawing. And that's what I do.
There's another question from Stephanie Stigliano. In looking at the scale of your mark in relation to the overall size of the work, I wonder how important rhythm is to you.
That's a good question. I don't know. I wonder if Stephanie, if you're talking about the watercolors or the airbrush pieces or the burn pieces, I would say that that's different. Because the airbrush it's an action thing, right? You're actually moving across kind of the burn pieces are really kind of intensely close up, and you're not really, I would say, I'm not really aware of a greater field, so I would say harder to set up any kind of rhythm.
We do have a related question. So Frank Shaw is asking, I think there's something truly fascinating. I find it fascinating about your process and like what kind of mental space you go into. So Frank is asking, when you're burning, are your thoughts focused on the process, the content, or in some other realm? And when you're burning, does time feel as if it passes quickly or slowly, or are you unaware of time altogether?
Well, sometimes sometimes I'm really aware of how slowly time is passing when I'm doing it, because it can be really arduous. Other times, not. And sometimes I'm thinking, or trying to think, I guess, about if it's a piece that is by nature memorialization of someone, I try to think of that. I try to keep that in mind. Sometimes I listen to movies. I can't watch anything because everything will go up in smoke. Right? But I do. Sometimes it's just work. It's like going to a job.
Mm-hmm.
But other times it can be quite mesmerizing. It just depends on the day.
It does. I love what you said earlier, that it's like performance art, but for an audience of one, which is yourself.
Yeah.
So Josh Barkone asks, and I think that's an interesting question. So he says, I'm sure you're very glad to have your work on a billboard, sharing your work with the community, but given the texture of your work, which seems so important, can a billboard convey your work?
Oh, probably not. I think about it. I think it looks beautiful. I think that people driving by would have absolutely no idea what that could possibly be. So I think that's probably true for a lot of the works, but
Right.
unless it's made specifically for a billboard, it's anybody's guess.
And I will say that is something that, as a staff at the Ulrich, we did think about, and the decision that Leslie advocated for, and that I think is really brilliant, was not, it was a deliberate choice not to identify the works on the billboards, because we wanted people to have that moment of, being startled, being surprised, perhaps being confused, and wanting to learn more. Because I do think that can be a really powerful moment in a day where, everything is routinized, everything's familiar, and suddenly you have something that kind of snaps you out of that routine and makes you want to learn more. And then hopefully people go on the website and kind of find out more about the work.
Because I think the Smartify app is really fun,
Mm-hmm.
That if you want the details, they're handy. They're there if you have the app.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So I think, but hopefully you can kind of get both the startle, the sort of the startling effect, and then also the knowledge. So Noveline Ross is asking, do you burn out the voids? Is the work itself transcending? Does it take you out of worldly space and concerns? So yeah, people really want to know what's going on in your head.
Well, you would really want to know. Yeah, as I say, sometimes it is. I think most artists enjoy that space that when your work takes you out of the mundane, right? I mean, I think there's always kind of a hope that you'll transcend ordinary time, but it doesn't always happen. And I think part of being an artist is understanding that it's a job, that you have to put the time in, whether you feel like it or not, a lot. So sometimes, as I say, sometimes the work is just really, really arduous, really, really hard. And I had a friend, an artist friend, who once said, you couldn't really call yourself an artist unless you work at least 4 hours a day in the studio. And so I think about that, because 4 hours is doing hard work. It's hard to stick to it.
Right. And I mean, and I think, that's something you've mentioned to me, that in part, like, your choice of medium has been guided by the fact that the work is so hard in some cases, like the woodcuts, right? That they actually over time have an impact on your body. And so you have to then adjust and find media that are less destructive on your body.
That's right. That's right. That's why the airbrush works, and drawing. I was looking for something low impact.
Mm-hmm.
I actually made woodcuts early, like in the 90s, that were all about hard work. That was the whole point of them.
Mm-hmm.
They were terrible hard work. But yeah, but it has its rewards. Hard work has its rewards.
So connected to that, I'm seeing a question. Catherine Snyder is asking, what do you think is your biggest major career accomplishment? Speaking of the rewards of hard work?
Yeah, that's interesting. Staying alive? I don't know. to have worked for 40 years, feel like that is something, because it's a lot of people don't make it that much farther outside of their graduate program, or, so that I would say that's my greatest accomplishment. Continuing to work against the odds.
Well, and I will say that, at least from what I've seen of your work, I think it's unusual for somebody to keep reinventing themselves and to keep reinventing their work in as many different ways as you have. And I feel like that reflects a certain kind of, intellectual nimbleness and creative, flexibility that, that's sort of, that you keep thinking of new ways to say different things.
I will say that I like to think of new ways to work. I'm always happy when I'm working in a medium that 20 other people are not working in. So there's that.
So Lee Starkle, hi Lee, is asking, sort of, I guess, speaking of intellectual nimbleness, whom are you reading of late and that may be impacting your work? I'm referring to writers, artists, philosophers, playwrights, essayists, etc.
I'm sad to say that, I would say that my reading has informed my work, but it's strangely, since March, all I have read is pandemic fiction. So, and I don't know why I am attracted to it. It seems like a bad choice, but it's what I've been reading.
What is pandemic fiction?
Well, for instance, Lawrence Wright's End of October, where he's talking about a virus that.
Okay.
Yeah. So speculative fiction, I guess.
Okay. So not stuff that was produced specifically in the pandemic, but fiction that until recently seemed speculative and imagined the effects of a large-scale pandemic.
Yeah. So, Lawrence Wright's book, I believe, was written just, I think it was only a year ago.
Oh, wow.
So, but it's very prescient. So, which is unnerving.
I don't think you're alone. I know my husband has been reading World War Z, which similarly it imagines a large-scale disaster happening. I think there's a kind of beauty in that, right? That we turn to what seemed like fiction to help us imagine the world when in a situation that nobody has dealt with in the past anyway. So it's not like there's a lot of historical precedent to turn to, with the exception of possibly of the 1918 flu pandemic.
I do try to help my friends prepare. Tell them to watch out for when the radio stations go down.
Oh,
they're in trouble when there's no news. So anyway, that's what always happens. It's like one of the first signs.
So Mary Kay is asking, do you ever break from the plan for your work? And if you do, what situations allow you to do this?
Well, there's always, I would say, there's always slippage in the work, partly, especially in the burned work, where I'm not kidding. I say that things will go up in smoke. But, I'm putting out fires all the time. So it's not like it just is just goes to plan all the time. It's you gotta work with it, and that's certainly true of the hairbrush things right now. Those are that's out of my control, really. But I don't know. When you ask me if I thought of myself as a conceptual artist, sometimes I think of myself as a visionary artist, because I have, in the past, had, dreams that I dreamt a whole exhibition. Part of the impetus in making the work is seeing it through to that vision, to I make it because I want to see it. And so that does require some planning.
But it sounds like things don't necessarily go absolutely according to plan.
You gotta have some flexibility. I'm a fairly rigid person, I think. I don't like a lot of change in my life, things like that, but still, things don't go to plan.
So Lori Brock is asking an interesting question in terms of maybe thinking about a parallel creative act, which is writing. So if your work was a written text, what would it be? A novel, an essay, a poem, a newspaper article, an archive? She says, I'm thinking about the parallels with writing. You edit obituaries by burning. You said you create the universe and make the rules like world building in fiction, the left to rightness of the long pieces that imitates reading. And you do have also works, we didn't get a chance to talk about them, but where you actually take excerpts from people's letters, right? I think it's a really prescient observation because you are a really committed letter writer and letter reader and letter keeper. So, yeah.
I suspect poetry, short poetry. I don't have that many words left, but I don't know. I'm being a little bit facetious because I really don't know. But I did have that thought of working with more text-based things. That it almost always makes a kind of poetry, and obituaries especially offer this kind of a rich language. I don't know, when I made Remember Me, I wanted to call it obliteration and have the text as that kind of found poetry, after it was burned out. But yeah, it wasn't. When I suggested that title to some friends, they didn't. I don't think it passed muster. So I'll rethink that.
I like it. I mean, in some way, like, an obituary, I don't know. It's like it obliterates it's like the first time when the person has absolutely no ability to have any say of what is said about them after their passing. It's all, and then it only like sort of after that, any sense of an ability to control your own identity is gone. But Remember Me also makes sense. There's a rhetorical question, and I think since it's 7:02, maybe we'll end with it. Patrick DeGan and Elizabeth Stevenson really want to know how you stay so awesome.
Only through friends like that. That's how.
Well, you've been a wonderful friend to the Ulrich, and I feel so fortunate that I've gotten to work with you and to get to know you and now do this program, and I'm sure there will be more stuff in the future. So thank you again. I feel really bad cutting us off, but we want to be mindful of the time and stick to our, schedule as to the plan. So thank you again, Ann. And I will say sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say I only just now started to relax.
And I will say to people who are still on that, do come back to the YouTube recording, and we'll hopefully be able to fix some of the technical glitches we had in post-production. And so, especially if you want to watch Ann's burning process, which is a really fascinating little video clip that we made. So good night, everybody. Thank you so much again for joining us. And thank you, Ann.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.